Welcome back to another episode of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business thanks to Thrivous. That's $5 all the way up to $160. The rules are in the description. Thank you very much, Lincoln Cannon there in Nevada. And thanks to David Kelly also from I Am Transhuman for your great work out there. Many posts on that campaign every single day, so make sure you check out that post. All right, well, we're going over to Benzion 2020, who's running for president of the United States. And, you know, Benzion 2020 being an advocate of preventative policies. This is the new word. Preventative policies, would not have allowed for this coronavirus to sweep across the world in such a dramatic fashion as we've seen happening, and leaving a trail of misery in its path. Benzion 2020, great to have you back on the show. How are you?
Sure. I'm feeling pretty well. And, like a lot of people, wondering what this, quote, New World Order, the title of this show, pretends. And that's not something that any of us can definitively answer at this early stage. Most assuredly, we are rather like the blind man reaching out and touching the back end of the elephant. And being blind, we have very little idea of what it is we're touching, but we know we're touching something rather large. And this is a large moment in history. People are saying that this is the effects of this itself, the effects of this sequestering, the effects on the economic and geopolitical order. This is on par with events like 9/11, on par with events like the Second World War, on par with events like anything in modern history. And I'm inclined to agree. And I'm looking forward to continuing that discussion here today. I believe that we are at a unique moment in history, a moment where we can see with crystal clarity that we need a public health service here in the United States. We need Medicare for all. We've noticed since the coronavirus has spread outside of this narrow strip of countries in the temperate zone, the mortality rate has actually gone up. And what is the difference between those developed countries and other less developed countries? That the mortality rate would go up from 2.5% up to above 4% overall. The difference is that by and large, those countries do not have the same kind of epidemic response. They do not have the same kind of public health service and public health initiatives of the same strength. And this means that more people will die. This is a reason that the United States, the wealthiest country in the world, is also the place where this epidemic is hitting the hardest. We do not have this kind of response. We need to consider that in this moment of history, we can be the adults in the room and upgrade our systems of this kind. And not only systems around public health, but also systems that would strengthen, because the economic effects here are the biggest effects to be felt as well. And that is why we need legislation along the lines of an economic bill of rights, so that people will be able to have the economic security in situations like this moving forward. This is not the last time that this will happen, but we can hope, and we do dearly hope, that the next time this happens, we will know what we are doing, and we will have the right kind of public health and economic systems in place to see that people will survive.
Yeah, really interesting salvo there, Ben. We did call this one New World Order because I think there is going to be a New World Order on the other side of this crisis. The world will look different. It'll be shaped differently. The psychology is being reshaped dramatically. Business plans and structures are being reshaped dramatically. The economy is being reshaped dramatically, and we will go into that in a little bit more about how technology is now being accelerated through the society in a systemic sort of way. And what that means for society. But first, let's rock into a little bit of breaking news on this side. And I'm looking at whitehouse.gov here. It says President Donald Trump is taking necessary safety measures at the border to prevent the further spread of the coronavirus. He says, "I will never hesitate never hesitate to take away take any necessary steps to protect the lives, health, and safety of the American people. I will always put the well-being of America first." The United States has reached a mutual agreement with Canada and Mexico to restrict non-essential travel across the northern and southern borders. America's shutting itself down to Canada and Mexico. What do you say to this? Do you think this is a good move to stop the spread of the coronavirus?
Yes. Well, we should note that this coronavirus outbreak is a good deal worse in the United States than it is in Canada and Mexico. So maybe under ordinary circumstances, I might be saying something rather different about this sort of move. This should not necessarily be viewed as a unilateral move or a nativist type undertaking to the same degree in this context, because pushing up to 20,000 people that we know of are affected in the United States. We don't want to see a country like Mexico, which is a poorer country, seeing those effects that we are seeing. Similarly, we have the same responsibility to Canada to some degree. So this is a complex matter, but this is this, I think, is on the order of magnitude of these stay-at-home orders, these lockdown orders. 1 in 5 Americans at present are under some kind of stay-at-home order, and awful lot more are self-sequestering at this time. And I would say that this particular breaking news of the day that you've described is similarly has a similar idea behind it.
All right. Well, yeah, that's really interesting news coming out of the United States. It is closing down its borders to Canada and Mexico for non-essential travelers. It says trade and businesses will continue to operate across the borders, ensuring workers and goods are not impeded, which is interesting. American citizens, lawful permanent residents, and individuals with valid travel documents will be exempted. And there's a whole bunch more of rules there on whitehouse.gov. But basically, so travel being shut down in the United States. Very interesting. Moving on, cash handouts bans in 2020. Cash handouts are looking more and more like they're on the table. Cash handouts to ease coronavirus economic impact won't work. The only long-term way to protect the vulnerable is an unconditional basic income. So cash handouts look like $1,000 per month or per week or something, or to residents in the United States. You can clarify which one that is. Looks like Donald Trump is looking to give out that sort of assistance, but there's an article here in Forbes that says it won't work. You need UBI, which is what we've been talking about here on this show, more in the context of automation. Do you want to clarify on the rules and then talk about UBI? Yes,
indeed. Well, there is there have been proposals, economic stimulus proposals, and economic stimulus measures of different kinds here in the United States and in different countries. We know that many governments, not just the United States, are trying to deal with layoffs, trying to deal with different types of approaches to bailouts, offering different kinds of tax breaks. There's an awful lot of countries that are having moratoriums on mortgage payments. And so there's a lot of ways to approach this sort of thing. If you have been following the news about this specific economic stimulus packet that is giving cash to every American, you probably are aware that many Republicans and a disturbing number of Democrats, people in this so-called Reform Party, these ostensibly reform-minded people, are spitting a little bit of austerity rhetoric about this and attaching means testing riders, attaching other things that do not that slow these necessary funds, and also create greater bureaucracy and other difficulties. And this is problematic. And what you said is quite true, Steele. We don't just need to see this one-time handout. We need to see a basic income system that is implemented across this country to see that people are able to survive in situations like this, and that our economic system is able to adapt to these new frameworks. A lot of people telecommuting. A lot of people should be able to move into other sectors, move into other types of businesses, starting small business and so forth. And a basic income solves many of these problems. It is a time in history to consider, as I mentioned in what you said, that opening salvo. It is a time to consider an economic bill of rights for all Americans, and it is a time to consider that this basic treatment of people as human beings, not as pieces of garbage who we let die in the street of illness or economic woe, but as human beings who have a lot to contribute to our world, and we need the kinds of systems that will see that they are able to do so. We have not had this historically, and this is a time in history where we can get behind this kind of measure.
Ben Zion 2020. So, it's hard to talk about this next subject because I want to stay on this economic point, and this is going to be hard because, this is dramatic, but, we're staring down the battle of another Great Depression, a Great Depression 2.0, the greatest recession ever, but I think it's more like the Great Depression now, looking at the Dow, looking at the S&P, looking at how these fake economies are faltering. Now is the time for Ben Zion 2020. Now is the time for Andrew Yang and these other associated peoples to give the American worker, to give the American consumer a handout so that you don't get social instability compounded on top of an economic crisis, and that you can keep Americans in different lower levels of service work, which is a huge chunk of the American economy, in a job in these next few months and the coming years when we're going to need a lot. If the statisticians haven't been lying and unemployment is 5 or 10%, and we remove the Williams stats, the shadow stats, for a second, we're probably looking at 20% unemployment in the United States. That's in line with some of the darkest days of the Great Depression. So, like we've been saying on this show, this is happening anyway because of automation. But there's also a pandemic out there, and this is accelerating this need for Ben Zion 2020 and some sort of economic justice, economic reform to manage this population through this tumultuous time. What do you say, Ben?
Yes. Well, firstly, we should say that the previously boasted about low unemployment rate in the United States, this was a lie. The unemployment rate being below 5% in the United States, this is people, statisticians, cooking the books. Ben Franklin's famous lies, damned lies and statistics type scenario. Because people who were not actively looking for a job at any given moment were not included in those numbers. People who were deemed as being unable to work, and those measures were very lax as to they were very happy to put people in those categories rather than confront the fact that the unemployment rate was already 3 to 4 times higher than what the official statistics were saying. So now we're looking at a point where you can no longer conceal those things. People are simply not leaving their homes, and so that 20% real unemployment rate is going to go up to just a mind-boggling 30-40%. And these are Great Depression era type statistics that we're looking at in a lot of respects.
So Benzai, in 2020, I'm now showing a chart that I always use to calculate what I think to be the real unemployment rate in the United States. And this is taken from John Williams' shadow government statistics analysis. And, this is not just Trump or Obama or Bush. This has been a long run policy of manipulating these stats down. But as people can see on the screen in front of them, we are looking at, this is unemployment data series. So the seasonally adjusted shadow stats alternate unemployment rate for February 2020 is 21%. Okay. Unemployment rate official versus shadow stats alternate. So official is this red line here. This is what they keep telling you in the media. This is what they tell you on press conferences. And according to the official stats, you've plummeted to a record low of unemployment. Okay, that sounds good. But the broadest, the U6, okay, it tracks a little bit in between the margins there, but the shadow stats are calculated differently, and they're not, they're not this sort of Margaret Thatcher calculations of unemployment, and you're looking at a 21.1%. So you can check out that website for yourself if you don't know about that website, but I think that would be a real eye-opener to some people about the real economic dislocation that's in the United States, where especially when you're on the ground in the United States and you're looking around some of these cities of San Fran or Detroit or Las Vegas or Los Angeles, and you see the amount of homeless, and you say, how doesn't that translate into the statistics? Well, maybe you could ask yourself if the statistics were manipulated on the downside. Now, if you want to exacerbate the crisis, okay, you can bail out Wall Street again. If you want to save your country, you can convert that cash into bailing out Main Street. You can save the homeless, and you can spur on economic activity from the bottom up, because obviously the other way around has not been doing it correctly. What do you say, Benzai, in 2020?
Yes. And again, these sham arguments that people like Trump and people who he represents in the two-party system have been making they have made the case that this high all-time high Dow Jones, this low unemployment, these other indicators, all of which are largely fabrications. The high Dow Jones is an indicator of how a very select number of Americans are doing. It has very little to do with ordinary people in their lives. But that number has gone down. The high of some recent earlier in this quarter was for the Dow Jones was 29,551. As of today, it's down to 19,100. So it's dropped more than 10,000 points. 50% of that value is gone. These unemployment statistics are skyrocketing. This strong economy and this strong case for having made America great again has been a paper tiger all along, and now we are seeing that. And people need to consider that this kind of Reaganomics and this kind of trickle down strategy, these are sham arguments sold to us by soulless human beings, and we need to look at serious strategies for strengthening and rebuilding the middle class, and not just hollow rhetoric and handouts, socialism for the rich, but dog eat dog capitalism for the working poor. It is a travesty.
And it is time to make a change, with the way that America has been run. It's been doing this. We've been on this trajectory now for over 100 years, and it hasn't worked out. We've had many bubbles and crashes, and the cycles get too big to fail. essentially. And every time that they get bailed out, for example, the airline industry comes running and crying and saying, we have so many X amount of employees that we pay well. We need a bailout. Every industry wants a bailout. The prostitution industry is now asking for a bailout because they have an X number of employees. But when you do these bailouts and you do this Keynesian approach to economics, what happens is you strengthen those core companies that get the bailout, and those core companies then invest not in the people, they invest in things like stock buybacks. And I could play you clips from Tim Cook from Apple or Foxconn CEOs or a whole bunch of them who are all bragging that their own stock is going up and therefore buying their own stock is great, but then somehow trying to turn around on CNN or on Fox Business or something and say, no, actually we're investing in people and in capital and in factories. It's all a sham. It's all a lie. And the underlying economy, they've bought into this hologram of fraud, and it's the same. It's the same in China. This is eventually you buy into your own propaganda. The Chinese bought into their own propaganda that they were exceptional, and now they're seeing the dramatic collapse of that society. When you buy your own propaganda, whether you're in America or in China, that can lead to your own downfall. What do you say on the economic front, Benzion?
Yes, indeed. Well, I will say basically what I said when we were in the throes of the 2008 economic crisis. These industries falling on hard times. We should rather than give them money that they're going to use for golden parachutes and stock buybacks, we should be nationalizing these industries. If this industry cannot survive on its own, then it can become a part of the United States industrial complex. And this is the case today, and it's particularly people are at this point in thinking about this where they say, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." And that's the case when we're talking about the airlines getting sums of this scale and using them for buybacks, then asking for more money. It's time to nationalize these failing industries and run these as government-run businesses. There's of course many cases where this is not the best option, but this is something where this is at least the kind of rhetoric where then you don't have companies just ripping off the government every chance they get for many billions of dollars. If you have a position wherein if an industry is failing, the government's response is to nationalize it.
Herbert Hoover is where Trump is now. Trump has to come up with a scheme to just like Herbert Hoover did. One of the big schemes that he came up with was the Hoover Dam project. The Hoover Dam is a big giant dam that then drove a city, and drove the future. If you want a new Hoover Dam project, Benzion, in amongst all this fiscal stimulus that stimulates innovation and the economy, you're looking at everything that we're talking about: curing aging, genome issues, genomics research, AI research. We're looking at the new frontier technologies. We're looking at information, cognitive investments. We're looking at space. We're looking at sea exploration. We're looking at smart city innovation. We're looking at revolutions in technology and industry across the board. That is your Hoover Dam project. What do you say to that, Benzion 2020?
Yes, indeed. And we need to be using emerging technology in precisely this fashion, and we need to encourage this. Your and my mutual friend Peter Zing was mentioned at some length in a piece from Singularity Hub yesterday, and talking about this fundamental problem. The fundamental problem being we have had advanced automation for 100 years now, but it's not being truly distributed in any real sense. It's being used to, in many ways, particularly in more recent decades, been used to enhance income inequality rather than enhance quality of life for ordinary people. And this is something that was pointed out also many, many decades ago by R. Buckminster Fuller. He noted that we have this point in technological progress where his ephemeralization, the ability to do more and more with less and less, a full automation concept, is something that could be used to dramatically enhance the quality of life and the output, the ability to do good work of ordinary citizens. But that was not the story of the 20th century. The story was the latter part of the 20th century. We moved into a period of kleptocracy and corporatocracy and strategies that specifically led to income inequality. And we can make better choices now. The future is yet unwritten. And so with policies like a universal basic income, with policies like universal health care, and with policies that are intended to enhance automation and use them for the betterment of society, we can right these wrongs of the past and see that the United States is once again truly a country that we can claim is exceptional and not. You'll notice Republicans, they were used to be quite quick to use the term American exceptionalism. They don't do it anymore because they've been robbing the till, and they can't point to that exceptionalism because that till is empty. So they say other things. They use fear-based stratagems, talking about how America is not great because of making people jump at ideas of xenophobia. But this is, of course, just a confidence trick to distract us from the fact that we have done ourselves wrong with these policies.
Benzion 2020, one thing does not have to look like the other. And if we are entering a period of hardship, I would be very disappointed if the images that we see in history are reflected in our modern society. It'd be inhumane, cruel, and downright disgusting, and a violation of human rights. We saw in the crash of 2008, a financial crash, people were thrown out on the street while houses remained empty. There's a glitch in the system there when you have an empty house and someone actually has to live on the street. We live in times, for example, the United States Transhumanist-Party is advocating 3D printing houses and constructing houses for the homeless in which they would own those houses to increase social instability. The United States has technology. It has super advanced societal systems ahead of itself. And, it would be absolutely, the world would look at the United States in shame. It would be a shameful moment if those images repeated, because the United States would simply, not reform its system because of some ideological baggage or some ideological throw that those moments in history would have to repeat. There will be a lot of empty buildings, empty real estate. There's a lot of food distribution. You've got big mega chains from Whole Foods to Walmart to Amazon. This does not have to look like it did in the past. And yet, I have a feeling that political leaders will, in the Senate, in the Congress, the whole class, the billionaire class, everyone will sit idly by and say that the system cannot change, and that history must either rhyme or repeat when it does not have to do either. And the United States Transhumanist Party proves that it doesn't have to do either, and that anything that they're saying about, oh, those people are left out in the cold because X, Y, and Z is a lie. It's a sham, it's a fraud, and the people must know this. What do you say, Benzo?
Yes. Well, I'm reminded of the way that these very sorts of folks have responded with continued attempts at neoconservative foreign affairs stratagems in a world that has a level of connectivity and the ability for small states and small actors to have a disproportionate effect and visibility. These neoconservative strategies make the United States look like a bunch of silly oafs. We're at the exact same point when you're talking about these domestic economic policies. We are not seriously considering where we are at this moment in history, and that does bear repeating where we are. We are at a point in history where an organization like Amazon.com is a monolith, and very close to being a full automation monolith, something that can deliver goods and services to everyone, even if they are almost all homebound. We are at a point where there's a high level of connectivity. This is not the situation that we were when they were Hoovervilles and people waiting in line with little tins for soup. This is a different scenario, and it's why I like Peter Zing's and this Singularity Hub article's take on this, because this is an opportunity for us to move truly into the 21st century. And it's unfortunate that it has to occur at the heels of a global pandemic. But it is something that we have, as a society, been not been as open to as we should have. And I hope that this difficult circumstance will lead to that greater openness.
Yeah, you're so right there, Ben. You know, it does not have to, history does not have to repeat or rhyme in this circumstance. There is an opportunity, a window here to actually do this right and, put the United States on a better footing. If you look after your people, you won't have to expend resources on police and ambulances and healthcare and from riots and instability in the streets and all that. You can eliminate all of that pressure by actually mitigating the strategies, caring for the people, caring for the genuine people. And, the Bernie Sanders crowd, again, don't agree with everything he has to say, don't agree with every policy he has to say, always have to say that first. But the Bernie Sanders crowd demonstrates, and it might be different to you, Ben, but demonstrates how, where that working class is and what their needs are and what they're feeling and how they're feeling in this system. And those people are frightened, those people are scared, and those people are the people who are ready those people are the people who need to be looked after the most in these circumstances. These are the people who have to, have someone has to have the political will to look out for these people in these times. Even if it's not Bernie Sanders who's going to become the president of the United States, Andrew Yang would have looked out for them, being a Democrat. Zoltan Itzman would have looked out for them. United States Transhumanist Party would look out for them. But what worries me is the duopoly will not look out for these types of people in the working class because of ideology and because of some nitpicking in the halls of Congress or the Senate, where two people have a personality conflict, and therefore these people are left on the street in the cold. What do you say?
Yes, indeed. I would say that what you've said bears repeating. I too do not agree with Bernie Sanders on every one of these particulars. In fact, looking at these many infrastructure projects that he's undertaken, I would undertake those projects in a rather different way. But in a Ben Zion administration, those projects would be undertaken. In a Yang administration, those projects would be undertaken. in a Zoltan-Isfin administration, those projects would be undertaken. And that is a central failing of this two-party system, is not concerning themselves with solving these grand human challenges, not concerning themselves with dealing with helping the middle class and working people. This is a tremendous travesty, and it's why I would say that Bernie Sanders is probably a better transhumanist than most of the transhumanists who you can find on speaking on YouTube. Because when Bernie Sanders is confronted with the statistic that precedes this particular epidemic, 68,000 people dying a year in the United States because of inadequate health care. When he sees a statistic like that, he says, I am for life of these people. I am for the health of these people. I want to solve this problem. I will build a public health service that solves this problem. And many of these transhumanists who we listen to, what are they saying right now in the wake of even greater problems? They're saying the same thing that my Aunt Ruth is saying. Don't forget to wash your hands. Stay indoors. We know all of these things. We need actual solutions, high-tech and institutional solutions, not the sort of bromides that you would hear from a kindergarten teacher. And that is why I would say that, again, someone like Sanders, any genuine economic populist, any genuine reform-minded person is on par in most of these respects with the techno-futurist talking head.
Yeah, you make some really good points there. I think it's almost beyond, like, if we're talking about, because the disgusting nature how America ignored the victims of the 2008 crisis. They ignored Occupy Wall Street. They ignored the homeless crisis in America. And I have a feeling that without rapid political change, they're going to ignore these people as well. And how far do you want to play this until you've got till the tippity top exposes themselves for what they are? The thing about the tippity top is they benefit from the U.S. consumer being strong. That's the goose that lays the golden egg. And do they want to damage that completely and their own safety? Yeah, it feels like it. It feels like they're willing to throw that goose under the bus, for reasons I do not understand. And if they want to save that, we need innovation now. We need technological solutions, and we need new ways to organize the system to manage such a huge amount of people in a crisis mode of something that we might have never seen before in history. And the United States Transhumanist-Party offers those solutions. It's all there. USTP. You got to go to United States Transhumanist-Party website there, and you will find solutions to mitigating some of these problems. And I am very concerned about this issue in a massive way. I think this is going to be a formidable crisis, and it's something that actually, unfortunately, it might not be overcome by these political elites by not advocating for certain policies. And we talk about UBI. It should be Project 222, Ben Zion. That's really starting to hit home with a lot of people. That's Charles Holstopple's, food, water, and shelter. Okay, Project 222. Yes. This needs immediate funding. Don't spend more money on a Pentagon bloat. Let's give Project 222 $100 billion, $200 billion, $300 billion, and spend that on domestic projects. What do you say, Ben?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes. And you and I have both drawn a lot of inspiration from Charles Holstopple and from Project 222. And that's something that, particularly at this moment in history, has serious implications on a global scale. Just in the pre-interview, we were talking about some of the cities that may be hit in the coming months. Maybe as the weather changes, they could be hit even worse. Cities in India, cities in West Africa, like our friends. We have many friends in Lagos. These these folks are in danger right now because they don't have even all of the bad things that Trump did, gutting pandemic response teams and undermining these necessary operations that would have allowed us to not be the worst growing area for coronavirus right now. What countries like India and Nigeria have in the way of those responses is small by comparison. And someone like Mr. Holsopple, particularly right now, his fine charity could be really helping to fill in those gaps, not only in North America but the world around. And I hope that he will continue to enjoy greater and greater success with that work.
Yeah, absolutely. I always supported Mr. Holsopple, Project 222. It's been here on the screen since I first met Mr. Holsopple when he was a candidate for the United States Transhumanist-Party. And what a great initiative that is. And he's doing diligent work over there in Nepal, working for food, shelter, and water for everyone. And there's certain dimensions of that, of how everyone can survive on certain dimensions of that. And that essentially in this time is a UBI. This should be a UBI project in these sorts of times. You should be entitled to food, shelter, and water to a bare minimum, if necessary, because it's human dignity and human decency that we're talking about. It's human rights. I remember, Ben Zion, when Flint, Michigan, or people in Detroit were trying to use the United Nations to sue the government for for water problems in their state or in their territory, a state, I guess, or in their cities, because the government would just neglect issues of human health, like water. Do you remember those issues, Ben Zion, and what do you think about that?
Yes, indeed, I do. This is a common problem, and it is a problem where we have this privatization mania that has swept across this country over these recent decades, and also this moneyed special interests who are able to basically purchase many politicians outright, so that they're not doing the essential work that they ought to be doing. This is a reason that a government exists, to prevent calamities like the ones you described. And we have a government that is bent over backwards to not do this, bent over backwards to be beholden to the likes of Koch Industries. When I say that the United States could be regarded as a wholly owned subsidiary of Koch Industries, that's said as something of a joke. And there's many other billionaires and outfits who could said to be guilty in that, besides Charles Koch. But it's not just a joke. It reflects a very real problem, and it is a problem that needs to be addressed. And it's why I don't feel bad saying what I said earlier, that when these same people fail in their businesses, we should not bail them out again, give them many more billions of dollars of taxpayer funds. We should nationalize those industries and make them a part of the greater American project. This is where we are at this moment in history, in my view. I'd like to shift gears for just a moment and call back what we discussed. We were talking about Nigeria and about potential concerns at this moment in history. And I would like to use this opportunity to mention that I and a number of speakers will be on a panel on April 23rd. That is the upcoming TAFs. That's a transdisciplinary agora for future discussions. Our friend, you can see information about them down in the corner there. And you can go to tafs.org. But I will be participating in a panel discussion talking about public health initiatives for longer lifespans on the African continent with my friend Paul Spiegel and with representatives from Public Health Administration and expertise from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, respectively. It'll be a great panel, and I'll mention the names of those other folks at the end of the broadcast. But I would encourage people to tune in for that teleconference event on April 23rd. We're going to discuss one of the truly great challenges of the Techno-Futurist Project. How do we achieve universal super longevity in our lifetime? And what can we do in these places to see that that happens? This is our duty as transhumanists. We must engage these conversations, and we must use the resources increasingly, I believe, at our disposal at this pivotal time in history to see that the life extension project is advanced.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. That's a great topic. And I'm telling you, with all this fiscal stimulus, going out the door, I just wish governments would be able to listen in on this conference and, adjust some of their spending to some of these projects. As Brett Nally so elegantly forwarded in our previous interview, this COVID-19 issue, it's more of an issue of aging than is of anything. A lot of the diseases that go around the world, viruses and all this stuff, they're related to aging. If we eliminate aging, we can eliminate our susceptibility to a lot of these different diseases. And it's really, really exciting to hear that you're going to go on that panel. Obviously, Taft's huge fan of the show. William Coburg, great guy. I love all of the Taft family. I call them the Taft family. I coined that. But I think it's true because, we love them all. And, we really wish the Taft's family, to be strong and united through these difficult times and to stay strong and to stay on topic and not to get washed away from the vision that is so beautifully illuminated in the Taft's arena. Now, Ben Zion, I wanted to also shift gears, but that's really, really exciting news, and thank you very much for illuminating us with that. I wanted to shift gears to the New World Order, which is the name of this. What do you think geopolitics will look like outside of after this crisis has ended? Obviously, everything's up in the air right now, but do you think there's going to be a dramatic shift to the world order?
Oh, yes, indeed. And, we started this conversation talking about something that reflects a kind of isolationism. I would say that it's sometimes a difficult impulse. The term isolationism describes many different kinds of actions, some of them quite nativist, some of them, I would say, more healthy-minded. But we will see an awful lot of insularity in domestic policies of countries in the wake of this event. We're already seeing a lot of that. As we mentioned, we are the blind man touching the backside of an elephant, trying to ascertain what it is that we are touching at this moment in history. But I do believe that we can expect to see new kinds of isolationism and new kinds and a co-occurring reliance on the automation that we described in that isolationism. I think that if the good work is being done of delivering the necessary goods to people and caring for people, this idea of what are the best economic policies, this is something that we can revisit. And so this is why we must stand for a basic income today, at this time in history, and we must fight for these things. There are, I think that we might see differences in political polarization. I think that people might move away from these caricaturesque polar opposites in their thinking and move toward real problem solving. I've said this before. If we go back to the genesis of some of the ideas that we've talked about, like an economic bill of rights, just a few years before that, of course, the New Deal was implemented, and this was a dramatic change in the way that federal funds were spent and the taxes were collected. It was a dramatic change in the way that the safety net, which had not really existed on any continent prior to that time, was envisioned and rolled out. And however, there were competing models at that time. And I think that some of those models do have some merit. I was able to interview some folks who knew people at this early stage of the technocracy movement, which had many of the goals of the New Deal, in a word, but was focused on turning the government into something that is run by scientists and engineers with efficiency and scientific principles in mind. And I think that that idea could become an organizing principle that moves us away from that polarization that we have described here. It's not terribly controversial, using institutions with greater efficiency. It's not terribly polarizing to move away from these discussions of identity politics and thinking of your political party in the way that you think of your sports team, but rather thinking of what they should be doing and how they can be better operating to those ends. And that is an important point, and one that I hope will come from these difficult times. And I would say, again, the United States is a place that's infamous for anti-science sentiments. The idea that some rube in Iowa, his opinions are equally valid to those of experts who have dedicated their lives, scientists who have dedicated their lives to the subject. And these very rubes are overwhelmingly the people who get elected to Congress. We need to return to a faith in expertise and in science. This is a fundamental problem, and it is a kind of fundamental problem that would allow people to be led down the garden path where they believe in something like trickle-down economics. They believe in something like Reaganomics. They believe in something like industries being able to shake down the United States government time and again for billions and billions of dollars in bailouts that they do not use to rebuild those industries, that they use for golden parachutes and stock buybacks and hideous ways. So we need to try to be much better. I think that another thing that can out of a difficult situation like this is less of an idea of an individual. We are, of course, all individuals. It goes without saying, and we have a right to be who we are and enjoy those things. But this idea of hyper-individualism, it does not serve the greater good. It does not serve the working of institutions. It's used as a wedge to confuse people and allow them to undermine these institutions. We need to move into a world where we do not have ordinary folks speaking out against universal health care, cutting off their own nose to spite their face because of their sick-minded ideologies. We need to set aside these ideologies and move toward a society of cooperation and better goals.
You know, Ben, what I keep hearing is, an end to Stockholm Syndrome. And I think that's what a lot of the American public conforms to. And especially in times of fear, they have Stockholm Syndrome and they feel sorry for the people who are ruling them and ripping them off and kicking them down. And they feel sorry for those people, and they've got to stop feeling sorry, and they've got to stop feeling scared, and they got to say, we want a project like 222 to reign supreme so that we can, us, our children, our families, and for the future, we can have food, water, and shelter. And, I would add into their healthcare as a basic human right. I would add into their dental care, healthcare, and some other things as a basic human right. And, it's really time, Ben Zion, for the capitalists and for the other people on the other end of the spectrum, the more collectivist, nationalist type thinkers when it comes to economics, to really start thinking of new systems to arrest this scenario. It seems to be somewhere in the middle, but also it seems to be somewhere outside of the box. And, the Zygos Project and a myriad of related projects similar to the Zygos Project try and remove that, try and remove the economic debate from this left-right paradigm. And they try and take it out of that left-right paradigm and try and say, no, technology can accelerate to us to a point where these things, food, water, and shelter, and possibly healthcare as well, become the backbone, become a pillar of a standard functioning normal society, and all of these other things, leisure, and money and other things become other talking points. They become other points after the fact that everyone has adequate access to food, water, shelter, and arguably some forms of healthcare. What do you say, Ben?
Yes, it is. It is crucial. It is crucial that we shift our focus as a society to this precise kind of collectivist attitude, not in service of collectivism, but in service of being able to do this basic work.
It's not. You mentioned the hyper-individualism, and I agree. The hyper-individualism has gone a little bit too far. But individuals should have sovereignty. Individuals have rights, and individuals do have rights to maneuver in their own way and live out and do their own things.
People who say this sort of thing, they're just spouting some fortune cookie wisdom that has no real relevance to discussions of this kind. And it's not something that is quite as prevalent on other continents.
Does have rights, and they do have the ability to think and say what they want about certain scenarios, and they should have right to travel and and some other things. But it's time to start to think that technology has wiped away some of the debates about food, water, healthcare, and shelter. Ben Zion 2020. That's the real point, is that technology has now jumped us ahead to the point where food, water, shelter, and arguably healthcare can be wiped off the table of the debate. You can still talk about how many rights individuals should have, and other related matters outside of these talking points of food, water, shelter, and healthcare. But this should become a stock standard pillar of civilization, and not fully automated in a way that a Carrington event or some sort of, i.e. a solar storm would wipe that civilization out. We ostensibly have that sort of automation now. Instead of all being robots, it's a mix of factory farms and people who drive the cars with some human components in there. But that's also fragile, as we have seen with this pandemic. This is not a secure system. And so, you would have to think, how do you, redundancy on redundancy on redundancy, Ben Zion 2020. But food, water, healthcare, and shelter could become a staple, just like breathing, of a new society, a humane society, because technology has advanced to the point where this has become possible. What do you say, Ben Zion 2020?
Yes, indeed, and sometimes it's been pointed out that when people on the right and more reform-minded people describe, for example, their interpretation of the Constitution or their interpretations of individual rights and liberties, they're almost speaking two different languages. And I think it's important to point out that this rugged individualism that we're describing, it doesn't mean anything if you're living out of doors. It doesn't mean anything if you're living like an animal. It doesn't mean anything if you don't have the money that you need to take care of your family. Hollow rhetoric is meaningless to you in that scenario. And that is why, first and foremost, we need things like Economic Bill of Rights. We need things like an ordered civil society that can provide for itself, that has a middle class, that is able to thrive and contribute. And people on the right, they're simply saying the wrong things. They're suggesting the wrong ideas in response to these concerns. We have to take care of ourselves and one another, and then perhaps we can point to these other constitutional concerns. But we really have to have an actual society first, and that's something that this coronavirus crisis is bringing into sharp focus. I'll change gears. I'll change gears for just a moment, and also say that another thing that derives, I think, that is of interest to the futurist from this coronavirus type reordering of the civil order is an interest in virtualization. Folks do have access to devices and data. They are homebound, many of them working from home, increasingly more of them telecommuting, and being isolated, being quarantined. It doesn't have to be a sad situation. Even though you are physically alone, you can connect to folks. You and I have done a great many programs together, Steele, and incredibly fascinating subjects. And I consider it a great honor to have done these with you. I've learned so much. But one of those programs that we did was about the role of virtual reality in improving people's mental health prospects. And
Thomas O'Carroll, right?
Yes, with Thomas O'Carroll, our friend from the London Futurists in the UK.
By the way, Thomas,
Party.
I know you're listening. We got to do another show soon, buddy. I'll see you soon.
Yes. I echo that sentiment. But we are looking at a similar scenario right now in the United States and the world around, with people feeling isolated. And I hope that they will embrace the technological these technologies that will allow them to solve those problems, because being isolated is a problem. And I think that we will see a growth. And I already know, just from recent events and discussions, a few futurists who are virtual reality positive, very pro virtual reality, but do not have virtual reality rigs in their home. And they say, because I am telecommuting now, I'm going to get a nicer virtual reality rig hooked up. I'm going to get an Oculus Rift hooked up. And this is that time. And I think that a lot of people
Ben,
might be using it.
If we're talking about food, water, shelter, and healthcare, I think that mental health is very important too. So this might just slide into the mental health care part. And if it's distributed in a fair and equal way, someone who should get on board with this in a positive way might be the big pharma industry, and we might take people off drugs and reorientate some of that R&D into a positive direction in this way. What do you say?
Yes, indeed. And this is going to be seen in other disciplines as well, to a high degree. We're looking at it also an era of telemedicine right now, because this technology can allow for interventions as well. So we have healthcare delivery and shortages. People who are the most crucial at this time in this global pandemic are also some of the people who are getting very low pay, and there's not enough of those workers, and that is unfortunate, and it must be remedied. But we are also at this moment where people are beginning to use some tablets and applications in these contexts, and using other telemedicine applications of ever more and more sophisticated kinds to fill in those gaps. And as people are increasingly under these quarantine and lockdown orders, we will see pretty critical advancements in the adaptation of these technologies in healthcare as well.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's a strengthening of the local and statewide healthcare system, especially with telecommuting medicine. This is a good thing on all fronts. If you think about this in your daily life, people. You wake up in the morning, you have a stomach issue, you talk to your doctor over the internet before you even leave the house, and they would diagnose you with your illness, and they would prescribe you a drug, and and if it goes through all the right channels, you would then get some sort of blockchain coded encryption, which you would then feed into your 3D print, your medicine, your printing machine that would 3D print your pill. And before you even start your day, you would print your drug out, and you would ingest your drug, and you would be ready to go, and you have your medicine there, and off you go. You would be diagnosed and fixed before you even left the house. The system as it is now is you wake up, you feel ill, you don't know whether to go to work or not, you chose to go to the doctor, you get in trouble by your boss because the doctor's queue is long and you have to sit around, then they have to write you out a prescription, then you got to go all the way down to the pharmacy, and then you get your drug, then you ingest your drug, it may or may not be correct, then you go back to your boss, you get yelled at by your boss for being late, then you got to show him the doctor's note, and then, then it goes on and on and on. In this other scenario, it's a one-step process. You wake up, you're watching TV, you get diagnosed, you get your prescription, you're out of the house, you're straight to work or whatever you're doing, or you work from home or whatever, and it's done. It's finished. Game over. So, that's a huge efficiency there on the healthcare front, for an example. And that's only one example that I just made up in my head of the efficiencies of telecommuting medicine and virtualized medicine and related themes.
Yes, and this is not theoretical. We've talked about this in the context of our friends in Estonia.
James Jones, CubeSpawn, he's talking about the patents are out there, the machines are out there that are almost on the brink of 3D printing medicines. It's not theoretical. Yeah. Sorry, go on about Estonia's healthcare system. It's important, I think, to say that these emerging technologies in the private sector will revolutionize how we deal with these problems. But it's also important to say that those in the public sector, I've been criticized on panel discussions on this show and others for pointing to Estonia, which is a small country. It has less than 2 million people, but there are countries, Japan, quite nearly the size of the United States, or well over pushing 140 million people, a large country, and they have in recent months made improvements to their national ID cards that now are used as health insurance cards and now contain data of use to these clients in this situation. So we're seeing this precise kind of digitalization in healthcare being used in very large countries, in very advanced countries. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it needs to be said. Japan has pretty good public health outcomes overall. People live a long time there. It's the longest lived of any large country by a fairly healthy margin there. And they're doing some things right in terms of the way that they order these institutions and the way that they adopt new technologies. And we need to be, again, those technocrats, those people, the very best of technocrats, those people who embrace science, who embrace engineering principles and efficiency. And this is how we step away from that polarization as well. It's funny, Ben, during this current health outbreak, COVID-19 idea, what was the first place everybody ran? And they all ran to the scientists, they ran to the drug companies, and they shied away from religion, because religion was offering them, cups to drink sacred water and pass around, which could be infectious. Everybody's relying on the scientists. The whole world economy now tilts on a couple of different bright minds around the world of whether or not they work out a vaccine. So where did they all run? Ben, and it was the scientists, it was the bright minds, it was the people out there who, who rely on, the rigorous science-based approach to life, and the whole world is now tilted on that. And I just hope that this isn't lost in translation on the other side of this, but you've got to remember this moment when it was science that held the world in its hands, and people should respect that. The Black Death was eliminated because of science. Penicillin was science. A lot of the cancer research and stuff that's eliminating cancers or on the verge of eliminating cancers is science. Science is a two-edged tool. It's a blunt instrument, but usually scientists want to do things for good. They don't want to do things for bad. And that's why you have to reorientate from a political position where the money falls so that you can use the scientists and the scientific knowledge not towards military uses, but we can beat those swords into plowshares and actually have better outcomes for civil society on a global scale. And that's where we can go from this. And it worries me that people will say, we all put our faith in science right at this point in time because of the economy. But when the economy comes back, then people say, it's those scientist guys. We got to figure, who cares about them? Let's cut their budgets all over again. And that's what I find disturbing in this. And I like your comments on that. I liked your comments on that, but you can comment on that too.
Yes, indeed. Well, this is... There's never been a grand human challenge that's been solved by magic, and magical thinking is in fact an impediment to solving any problem in your life. You should resist that. You should resist it at every turn. And we're seeing at this particular time in history, people like Jim Baker, this televangelist who's selling snake oil. He's literally selling. He's literally selling fake coronavirus cure. He's going to go to jail for this. Paula White, Trump's personal pastor, is wanting to be selling these fake cures. Mike Huckabee, this is a guy who's more or less had his sideline for years and years, selling garbage, just absolute garbage to gullible people. And you need to stop being so gullible. These kinds of things, these kinds of people, they don't help. And it's right that people are more skeptical at this moment. It's right that these kind of people are going to jail for things like this. We need to use society's scarce resources in an intelligent way.
People might make fun of this show or me or you or anybody who comes on this show because, maybe we're boring or maybe we're not as entertaining as some people and we talk about serious issues and that might be whatever. But you know what? I'm not selling snake oil. I'm not sitting here saying, here, buy a coronavirus cure or something. I don't do that. I'm real. I'm flat with you. If it's boring, if it's not, you can come in, you can jump out, you can please subscribe. It will help a lot. But I'm not sitting here selling snake oil. I'm not sitting here selling fear. I'm not sitting here, selling some sort of profitable item that really takes off when the fear really rises. No, we're sitting here trying to generate solutions, and it's much harder than people would think. And if more people wanted to take the plunge, I dare them to do it, because I tell you what, it's much harder to generate solutions and to generate solutions to difficult ideas and try and sell that than it is to sell snake oil. Selling snake oil is quite easy to do. You mentioned a couple of fearmongers who are doing that, and rightly, go to jail. Good on them. Go to jail. I don't want to see these people anymore. And the less this sort of rhetoric we have in society, the better. The better. Goodbye. Boom, 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 boom. You're in jail now. Ha, 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 ha.
Yes. And you and I have a long history on this program of support for religious moderates. But we should say that people who are literally lying, religious literalists, these are people who are lying when asked about a problem. They give you a fanciful solution. They give you a nonsensical solution. They might believe that
if they want to
solution,
say,
but it is
if they want to
nevertheless
say we want to
untrue.
leave it in God's hands because, God will deliver us from the plague, that's one thing. But if they say, if they get some lemonade and pour it in a glass and say, this is what God told me to give you because this will cure you of this ailment, that's a lie. That's a blatant lie. And, I can understand neoliberal economics, and it's the same thing, in The Economist or the New York Times or all of these other things. The people don't understand the neo-propaganda that's going around. And I know you know this very well, Ben, because you come from that other side and you can see it. But I can see it from this side. And, and we both can see the propaganda. And it's something, this whole crash has really revealed the propaganda machine and how elegant it is. But it also reveals a very old thing about propaganda, that people always fall for propaganda. If you're in Nazi Germany and you're at the height of that fervor, that fervor of Nazism, the people fell for the propaganda because it felt good at the time. It felt right. Everyone was doing it. It's herd mentality, herd psychology. That was the thing to do. And it's the same in this market conditions. Everyone fell for the propaganda because everyone else was doing it. The stock market was going up. The president was cheering it. The economic fundamentals were fine, on and on and on. And it's the same thing, we're talking about. There's needs to be a dramatic shift in how people think about science and how people think about the future, and don't fall into the propaganda that once and if things go back to normal in a regulated way, that we can just mitigate the future crisis by doing what we did before. That's propaganda. That's wrong. That's evil. What's real is this show. What's real is real solutions to issues. And you can come on this show if you want, if you've got some sort of degree, or if you've got a PhD, or if you've got some sort of YouTube channel and reach and stuff, come on this show and have a talk and tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why this is a dumb idea. But, we're not selling snake oil here. We're trying to deliver and generate solutions to issues, and that's extremely hard to do. Good point, then, Ben Zion, for talking about these evil people selling, to the elderly. I bet you it's to the elderly. These fake solutions, these fake solutions, and they deserve to go to jail.
And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, Steele. Really, one of my biggest pet peeves is that people will fall over themselves to be critical of the techno-futurist project for being in some degree fanciful or concerning itself with ideas that have not yet come to pass. But at the same time, they will make excuse after excuse for these kinds of snake oil salesmen, these kind of people whose ideas, deeply flawed ideas, have been with us for a longer time.
Okay, Ben, and talking about this, you're bringing up a lot of good points. Yeah, you're bringing up a lot of good points here. And so when they turn around, when the unemployment rate goes up, and there's people out on the street who used to have houses in a few months, and they turn around, and these politicians and these bankers, and they turn around and they say, no, there's nothing we can do. The system doesn't allow me to do this. It's a lie. It's propaganda. It's fraud. It's snake oil. And they're selling what's left of the population a lie. It's a lie. There's enough resources to adequately allow people for food, shelter, water, and arguably healthcare, depending on the political will. This should be a stock standard staple of the modern era. This doesn't have to be people don't have to stand in bread lines all the way around the corner. And the neo bread lines, and I didn't want to say this previously, but the neo bread lines have been the welfare that they've been giving out, these menial welfare ideas, that's been the bread lines. People can't see the bread lines because they say, oh, I get a check and I still have just hanging on to everything. That's been the bread lines. People don't understand what the bread lines are actually like because they're a 21st century bread line. But again, that's a lie. That is a sham. That's a schmozzle. Because actually, those people have put themselves in a higher state of existence than the people who are actually homeless and on the street. They're somehow more enlightened because they get their little, breadline welfare check every day, and then they vote these snake oil salesmen in to protect them. Those people are not going to protect you. Those people are going to lie as soon as they can cut you from the system. They're going to go snip, 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 and then they're going to say, well, the structure can't support you. You're on your own. It's a lie. It's a lie. It's neo-propaganda. It's disgusting, and I'm afraid for those people.
Yes. And I think we should call into focus something that's another kind of snake oil salesman that's out in full force right now, and that is the lobbies of the private health insurance and big pharma are working very hard with all manner of socially engineered influence operation and propaganda to prevent this shift in the public's attitude toward a public health service and universal health care and a single payer system, a Medicare for all type system. And they're spending money right now to insinuate themselves into these discussions and say, well, maybe this isn't the answer. Maybe there's another answer. Our government needs to become that big pharma. Our government needs to become that health insurer on a grand scale, and we need to move away from this system that is willfully murdering tens of thousands of people a year, 68,000 people a year. Because of these lobbies, we need to disregard these people. We need to allow these problems to be solved once and for all, as they are done in the rest of the developed world. On these other continents and places where we do not have a corporatocracy to such a high degree, people can get health care. They're not just allowed to die. And this is a moment in history where we can demand that the right thing is being done. That is truly the transhumanist way to see that people can live as long as they might want to. That's not just a thought experiment in this kind of circumstance. It is being prevented by these institutions, because you can't live as long as you might like if you're going to die of a preventable illness because of inadequate health care. We need to fix this first problem of having a public health service, and then move to having a public health service that treats aging as a disease and further reduces costs as well, as in the futurist New Deal for America, Medicare for All Plus. My proposal for exactly such a set of initiatives.
You know, it's America's just moving further and further away from the ideas of its founders, and you know, it draws to me to the mind of the Gettysburg Address, which is a very famous speech in the United States, where he says, you know, it is not, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. And the point is that it's of the people, by the people, for the people. And you know, the tragedy of the United States in this context is that they rejigged who was a person. Remember that? The corporations became people. Now we have to look after the people. Oh, for the people, who? For Dynacorp, for Megacorps, for the corporation. That's a legal person, you know. So now every time these people misbehave, all they say is, oh, we have a few bad apples, a few bad apples, a few bad apples. That's all you ever hear. And $1 billion every time they say that is just gone out of my mouth. Boom! That's $1 billion. That's a few million people exposed to the cold. You know, this is the tragedy of the United States. You're going to Abraham Lincoln laying out it's a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and America renamed who a person was and now a person is a corporation, and now we look after these people. We don't look after the actual real people in the United States, and you're going to see that again. And I think, we need a refreshing of the Gettysburg Address, where the words, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, is rejigged into a modern context, Benzo, in 2020, where food, water, shelter, and arguably healthcare are now just staples, standard pillars of the society, and then everything else is on the table after that, and you remove these corporation acts where they are people. They are not people. These are collections of people. These are collections of, this is a business. A business is not a person. It doesn't have blood. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have a heart or a soul. It's an entity. It's a heartless, cold entity that chases after economics incentives and tries to maximize those incentives using any means possible. We need to go back to the Gettysburg Address. We need to learn our lesson for history, and we need to have a new Gettysburg Address. And Ben Zion, you were at Gettysburg. You know this, and you've seen the graveyards. It's not fun what happens when you deviate from this course. Yes.
I've been to Gettysburg a few times, and also been to Arlington Cemetery recently for that speech of a similar timber. And I think it bears repeating what you have said. Corporations are not people, and also, insofar as they are described as person-like entities, they are person-like entities who are legally obligated to behave like sociopaths. They are legally obligated by their charters to defray costs in secret to the detriment of those around them, by damaging the environment, by hurting people, and not taking any measure of accountability for having done so. And this is why, again, the corporatocracy that has unfolded in the United States over these past 4 decades, this phenomena of the United States being a wholly owned subsidiary of Koch Industries, it is not helpful to the middle class. It is not in any way strengthening our human development and public health and well-being outcomes, because these institutions are incapable of operating in this fashion in any real way. And we have to regulate them. We have to hold ourselves, all of us, and our institutions to a much higher standard. And I do believe that is in the zeitgeist at this particular moment, as we are looking at precisely these failings leading to a global pandemic.
Yeah, and as I always say, I am a capitalist, and I'm attacking this neo-Keynesian craziness, and I don't agree with this notion that corporations are people, because it creates an unfair advantage in the capitalistic model. That's cronyism defined, and that's disgusting. And I've always hated this notion as well. And you're right, it distorts the incentives from in all sorts of horrific ways. If your idea of Adam Smith's free market is what we see today, a corporatocracy, large concerns ruling over you with an iron fist, that being the only way for you to make a living, and not something like a basic income economy where people are starting small businesses, starting sole proprietorships, starting partnerships, starting businesses with their spouses, starting cooperative forms of businesses. Those are free market institutions of a purer kind. Adam Smith never advocated.
Never be. Advocating for that corporatocracy, shame on you.
Yeah,
you
I
are
agree.
brainwashed buffoon.
Adam Smith never advocated for this sort of control. He wrote a lot about monopoly control and about political power, collusion, oligopoly, and all the other things that would lead to this sort of, what you need is a free functioning market. Obviously, you have to remove a lot of this 1980s, Greed is good as well. This is obviously a failing of society, and Donald Trump, being an 80s kingpin, brought that back, this greed is good idea. And, that's why, the United States would become so reliant on a far distant power like China in its supply chain, for example. Greed is not good. Stability is good. National infrastructure projects, and we live in the 21st century where food, water, shelter, and healthcare could become an absolute staple of society. The Brits knew this. The Brits, when they had their famous empire that spanned the world, they ensured that this happened for their domestic population as well. And, if you don't do this now in the United States, you're going to lose your empire, or whatever you want to call it. You're going to lose your standing in the world. You'll be laughed at, mocked, and you will deteriorate from the inside out. In a certain way. So the United States better start thinking really hard about its own future and what it wants for its future. Ben Zion, you've been great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything else you wanted to say? I know you're going to a TAFS meeting. Reiterate that and anything else you want to say?
Yes, so April 23rd, we will have a TAFS panel on the subject of public health initiatives and leapfrogging on the African continent, leapfrogging toward a universal super longevity on that continent. This should be viewed as a strategy session with thinkers on the subject, with people with real world experience. I mentioned folks from Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa will be represented at that event, and we will be discussing this, I think, very timely subject of life extension and how we build initiatives of this kind in these emerging markets for healthcare. That's going to be an incredible talk. So tune in for that. That's 9 Pacific in approximately 1 month's time. That's 9 a.m. Pacific in approximately 1 month's time, April 23rd. And that's going to be a great talk. I would also encourage people. I was laying more of the groundwork for the my Guinness World Record virtual reality, longest period of virtual reality usage record. Because of the shutdowns from the coronavirus, some of my witnesses, I am required to have witnesses. Some of my witnesses have become temporarily unavailable. We are still planning this event, but there have been some small slowdowns in that. That still is going forward. So stay tuned to benzion2020.com for further updates on that event, and we'll be sharing that far and wide. It's going to be an exciting moment. It's an exciting moment right now for virtual reality. It's an exciting moment for people engaging in this kind of immersion, and we want to be a voice for this exciting emerging culture. I would also encourage people to, again, have a look at the Futurist New Deal for America. My plan, we've described at some great length in the course of this talk, some of the reasons why we need the Futurist New Deal for America. We need to support the middle class freedom dividend that's described in the Futurist New Deal for America so that we can transform the economy in the ways that we've discussed. We need to support Medicare for All Plus, this public health service that uses emerging technology and emerging biomedical breakthroughs to have better outcomes at lower costs. And we need, of course, to have a blockchain voting, I Vote USA, a blockchain voting program. This drives us into the 21st century. Digitalization itself is a great reduction in cost in any sector, and that includes in governance. And so we must support the transparency and efficiency of blockchain voting, and that is also central in the Futurist New Deal for America. I Vote USA, Medicare for All Plus, the middle class freedom dividend. This is a platform for the 20th century and for this new moment in American history. So please go to benzion2020.com and learn more about the Futurist New Deal for America. Thank you, my friends.
All right. Thank you very much, Benzion 2020. Thanks to all the small contributors as well. Mr. Shoemaker, Gennady Stolarov, Superfan Mike DeVerde, and a growing bunch of others who are keeping this show on life support. Thank you very much. for all your contributions. It's all very well received and used to keep the show on the road in these great times of struggle. Well, thank you very much, Ben Zion, as well. Future of Humanity Project, who wants me to say the future is in your hands, and I very much appreciate the Future for Humanity Project as well. Thank you very much, Ben. It's been great. Food, shelter, water, and healthcare. We live in the 21st century. There are enough resources to officiate this into some sort of legislative demand. Thank you very much, Ben. We got a lot more to talk about. I'll see you soon. The world's moving very fast. It's frozen, but it's going to move very fast. It's very interesting times we live in, and critical. We live in the critical time of history, and the United States Transhumanist-Party is rising to the occasion, and it's great to see.
Yeah. Stay tuned for more in-depth economic and policy analysis from Detonation. Subscribe and share. Do it now. You're getting insights that you cannot get anywhere else from this wonderful program. So please support it in any way that you can.
Thanks, Ben.